This conference will now be recorded.
Hello, this is going to be a quick demonstration of how to use the QuickBooks Online import. Just some quick comments about what's different and similar between it and the regular import, and just kind of show an example of theoretically how it should work. So we have set up a new set of imports for reports, GL exports. We got QuickBooks Online, and then QuickBooks Online Detailed Payments. And these are basically mimicking the original QuickBooks where we had QuickBooks and then QuickBooks Detailed that detailed out the individual payments. Functionality here between the two should be the same. They have the same options. So if I go in and run QuickBooks Online, we'll do the detailed payments. I will have an option for date range, which we can set the default to since the last daily closeout. It'll have an option to select a division, so if you need to set one up for a particular division, and then it will have something that is unique to this file that is purely for the QuickBooks Online, and that is a journal number. QuickBooks Online requires a journal number whenever we do the import. The actual number itself does not matter, and in fact, you can import the same journal number multiple times, so the actual number itself does not matter. And so we just set it up as a report parameter so that way the user can define whatever field they want. So it's just a typable field that is part of the import file that will be included, and you can manually adjust it. You can set it to a flat number and always use the same number. You're going to change it each time that you do it, up to the user. The actual mapping is the exact same mapping that that the regular QuickBooks would do. So if I go to Setup, Accounting Setup, Chart of Accounts, and then just go through the different accounts, take a look. Undeposited goes into undeposited funds, income, sales. These go into sales income, and they will still use the same sub-accounts that QuickBooks does. So whenever you're matching to the files in here and checking your chart of accounts, the same rules for mapping the standard QuickBooks and the QuickBooks Online is no different. So if you have sub-accounts, you want to make sure to account for those. If you have other accounts, just making sure that the names match. So liabilities, sub-account, customer credits. So we changed it on our internal testing to make sure that whenever we're mapping it, it's tied to liabilities, sub-account, customer credits. That rule is no different than the desktop version of QuickBooks, making sure that those account names match. But with that all said, so now if I go and say reports, and we'll just run that, customers receivables, QuickBooks and online test, and I'll go ahead and say, let's do everything up from last month up through today, and I'll give it a journal number, and then execute this. This is going to be defaulted to a CSV file format. And I can go stick it in here, so 6.5, save it. Just to show things off before we get too far, this is going to be found setup, reporting setup, and then reports on main menu, financial reports, and GL exports. These files are not actually Crystal report files. They are queries that are built in. So if you wanted to hard set a journal ID to be a different rule, we can work with you to change that if it needs to be, if you want to use an ID in the system, if you wanted to be like a variation of the date and do like 6/5/1407 to match whatever the date is. We can change the behavior if the particular user wants to make a different behavior change for journal ID or anything else technically. But otherwise, this is just where those files are at. And again, they are just standard queries rather than actual Crystal reports because we can tell it to default to a CSV file type. Now, with that said and done, with the way that the files are set up and the way that we've handled and made sure that they're mapping, on the QuickBooks Online side of things, if we go up into the gear and say import data, we can say that we want to import a journal entry. It'll give a couple of rules for the QuickBooks Online, but essentially you can go browse and find the file. So here's the one that I've done. We've set up the file in such a way so that way once I map it and I go to the next step, everything here should be pre-mapped. So I should not have to make any changes here if I use the file that had been set up. If you want to double check, or your file, if you set up your own file and make a couple of adjustments, you might need to change and say, okay, this field is mapped to this field. If your format on the date is slightly different, you can make changes to that, but just know that we've gone through and made sure that the file fields on the report should automatically have a matching field, so they should not have to be changed mapping wise, because it should already know this field's going to match this field. But this gives you a chance to review that to make sure. But essentially at this point now, all the fields are mapped, and I just hit next, and it's going to tell me that, okay, because I use a different time frame where I have a couple accounts that are not mapped because I had used a different time frame than my previous test. So if something is wrong, it will let you know. So if I go back now, and let's go previous, and let's go back. I'm going to go into control, and I'll rerun the file, and I'll select a time frame that I know had worked. So if I go here, I can go and say custom, and I'll just do this month because I know that previous testing we had done to make sure that the files that are used should match that, unless, let's try to think if I did anything new. So let me rerun this. Do that, pull that up. Okay, so I might have made a couple of changes since the last time I had tested this. So I hadn't mapped up any, basically it's the issue that we're having, or that this is showcasing, is that if the file contains unmapped accounts, it's going to not show those. So I would need to go through and remap those. So I'm going to do a different time frame. And let's do custom. And I don't want to include today because I think I might have made a couple of changes. So we'll say 5/20 to do that time frame. Okay. And then we'll go browse our file. Okay. And then once you select it, it'll go through. And if everything goes through without any errors, it will say one new journal entry will be imported. And we can go ahead and say complete import. And that's it. So I would go say done. And now I can go to the gear, go to chart of accounts, and find an account that was used on that import. And so in this case here, I do believe that one of the fields that we had used was my state tax payable. And there is a couple of previous entries. And so let's go back. I'm just looking through to see what got imported. Okay, so there are some previous tests that we had done, and then there's the entry. Here's a different entry for the one that we just did, 6.5. And if I go here, I can click on that and click on edit to go view that particular journal. It will pull up all the information on that particular journal. Because things are done as a full journal and not individual transactions, they can kind of see everything as a whole. And if I try to go through and remove this, if I need to undo something, I can select that and delete that, and it will reverse the entire journal entry. So I can't make an invalid entry. I can essentially delete and review and undo the entire journal if I need to re-import it. It's very easy to undo that because one delete will delete the entire journal that had been done. But as far as things go, that's pretty much it. And as you saw, the biggest important part of this is making sure that the information that is imported is mapped up correctly, because that's the one major thing that will kind of crash your import, and that is up to the user, you as a user, to go through and make sure that the accounts are mapped up to the accounts that you use. And so I just want to look at one of the previous ones that we did, just to show the file itself as a whole. And I'll have to give this a second to open. Usually a little bit quicker than this. Okay, and then yeah, this is the original files that were that we had exported for the original one. And so the issue is because in my system I have OOB accounts receivable, and on QuickBooks Online we had never set up an account to match that. So in here, there is no OOB accounts receivable, it's just accounts receivable AR, and that's why the initial file did not import correctly. And so that's just a matter of making sure that your account names are matched up. So I could have, instead of just trying to find a different date range, I also could have either created a new account or changed the account name on my export to dump into those accounts. But otherwise, it is very similar process to the desktop version of QuickBooks when it comes to importing it. It's just now it has to be done as a very specific CSV file, but when it's handled, it should go through and have everything mapped up and ready to go. And also, as mentioned, this is the detail file, so each individual payment will show up as a separate entity when it goes to do the export and dump that information out. So hopefully this helps. If you have additional questions, if you need to make changes or want to make changes to your import, that can be done through the consulting department. And we can talk about any changes that you guys need to make, and that we can also help customize that import to tailor it if you need changes to be made. So thanks everybody. Have a great day.